I am Morris Abram. 13 years ago, I was diagnosed as having acute myelogenous leukemia, the most dangerous, ravaging, and certainly fatal form of that terrible disease. I was told that by a compassionate friend and doctor whom I had gone to for a simple routine examination. I was startled.
You are watching a person describe how they were told they were going to die and how they overcame it by attitude. I'm David Hoffman, independent documentary filmmaker, bird by my side, and I got the chance to film 4 of these unique individuals that you're going to see tell stories of how they overcame, not life-threatening, you're going to die, you got 2 weeks, you got 3 weeks, you got 3 months, kinds of situations, beat it, and what attitude they took that caused that to happen. I got the job to film this Dr. Bernie Siegel. He wrote million-seller books, Love, Medicine, and Miracles, and he was a surgeon who believed in something unusual that he saw with his patients. He saw people's attitude affect their life expectancy and their ability to heal. He saw people who had love in their hearts affect change in themselves. And he began to see that attitude extended life or diminished life. He wrote books, he spoke publicly, he's very controversial because he never had the kind of proof that takes a lot of money and time, but he believed it and I believed it after I talked with the people you're about to see. So he gave me the names of dozens of his patients who had been through this experience of attitude, some with traditional medicine, some without, and life expectancy, and I filmed them. How was I going to film them? I set each of them in a room with a camera, and I said, look, I'm going to leave the room. You're going to speak to the camera, and you're going to tell the audience what you learned and what you think they should do. So you're about to see these 4 people and to hear from them what it is that Bernie supported, encouraged, provoked, and how that changed their ability to fight the disease and to beat the disease, to fight for their lives.
When I was diagnosed as having lymphoma in stage 4, I knew that I was dying. I didn't have any question about it. The doctors didn't have to tell me that. My uncle, who is a respected cancer researcher, told me that I might just as well enjoy my last days on earth. But I wasn't able to just follow along with that. I was extremely terrified. I was not in the least bit classy. I just didn't have any social grace about me in the least. I knew from what I'd learned before and from what people around me were saying that I needed to have a good attitude. And that was even more terrifying because I didn't have the slightest clue how to get a good attitude.
At 9 years old, I was diagnosed with an inoperable brain tumor. They told me I was terminal, 1 year to live. I was so depressed and so down. And then one night, I was looking at myself, laying in bed, and saying, my God, I'm going to die if I don't do something now, if I don't commit myself to something. And yes, you have the power. You have the power to make the decision if you want to die or if you want to fight. And there's no guarantee. There's none at all that you'll live. But at least you'll know you'll go out fighting.
On March 29th, an outstanding doctor told me it was malignant, my lung cancer was inoperable, I should get my estate in order. My mind was totally blown. I did have presence enough of mind to ask him 2 questions. First, I asked, since I was told my cancer was inoperable, obviously surgery was the only treatment for cancer, is there anything else I can do? He said, we could give you radiation therapy, but it would only make you sicker. I suggest you go home and get your affairs in order. With this, he took away all hope. At that time, and that's the only time, that my wife and I completely broke down. We both sobbed. And she regained her composure quickly. Eventually, I did. But I lived for 5 days without hope. And I can tell you that any minute of those 5 days was worse than all the treatments I went through.
When I was in the hospital, Mount Sinai overlooking Central Park, I would think and concentrate on the fact that daily I played in that park baseball with my 11-year-old son. And I suppose the thought that I must return to that park, must play baseball again, must feel the wind and see the trees and touch his body. I felt that that was absolutely necessary, even if I could survive only long enough to do that once again. One doesn't realize how much those simple pleasures mean in terms of creating the determination to live.
He steps back into the room. He pulls up a chair and says, "Garrett, we believe you have a brain tumor. We're not sure, but we believe you have a brain tumor." Now, picture yourself as 9 years old or any age being told you have cancer and a brain tumor. It scares you, folks. I mean, think about it. And I know the ones who are watching me right now tell you about this are scared. Sure, that's a natural response.
I made an early decision that while I might be dragged to my grave by leukemia, I certainly wouldn't walk there. And I determined to look for the best medical help, and I was determined also, if it were possible, for one person to live to be that one person. Here it is, 13 years later. I've been free of the disease for the last 13 years. I do not even see a doctor for my former disease. I am in good health. I do all the things I used to do before the disease and more. I'm a happy man. I'm a healthy man.
I finally realized, I can remember when I was so down that I was walking up the stairs and I had already started radiation treatment. My hair had fallen out. And my mom was screaming at me, "Garrett, if you don't do something, damn it, you're gonna die." And I walked into my room and lay down, went to sleep, and then woke up in the middle of the night, like I told you before, and thought to myself, my God, she's right. 9 years old and dead. It's not fair. It never was. So I had to make that decision. And what I'm saying to you people is you can make that decision too. I'm not special. You're special. We're all special if that's true. Because it's your disease, not the disease has you. You have it. It's just like having a lunchbox or any other item. You have the disease. Do something about it.
I was encouraged by the fact that I did not believe for a moment that I was ready to die. I admitted that cancer could drag me to the grave, but I wasn't going to walk. There was no way that I was going to walk to the grave. I felt my life was incomplete.
If a doctor has told you you are terminal, in my opinion, terminal is a person who is going to die this afternoon or tomorrow or maybe the rest of this week. As one pediatric oncologist told me, terminal is a disease you get in the bus station. If a person has months or more to live, they are definitely not terminal, other than the fact that all of us were terminal when we were born. Every one of us are going to die. The idea is to postpone that death as long as possible, and as long as we can have a quality life. That's all important.
Something that's real important also is I don't think cancer is an illness that's just physical. It's an illness of the whole being. I knew that there were things wrong in my attitude towards life. I wasn't having a good life. I was not happy. I was not fulfilled. I felt like I was a mess. It was very clear to me that cancer somehow made sense to me. And it certainly wasn't just some monstrous thing coming from the outside. It had very much intimately to do with me and my way of being in the world. I had to create a healing environment on every level. So I addressed the physical, the mental, the emotional, the spiritual, the social, the environmental, the aesthetic. I just surrounded myself with as healing an environment as I could. And in addition to the physical benefits and the emotional benefits that came from creating such a lovely environment for myself, I also was giving myself the message, without knowing I was doing it until later, that I cared about me, that I really mattered. It was a big surprise to me because I'd never even thought that I cared at all about me. I started doing affirmations. I love myself. I cried because I felt like I was lying, and I had a big standard that I wouldn't lie to myself. But after a while of saying it, I just kept pushing myself to do it. So I did. It's a lot of work, but it works.
Is there scientific validity for a relationship between mind and body? But more importantly, have studies been done to prove this? And the answer is yes. There's incredible amounts of evidence in the animal literature that if you take rats, put them in cages, and give some shocks, other shocks, but they have a control mechanism which will turn it off, and then you have a control group that isn't shocked. The rats that have the control over the shock have less cancer than the others, and often less than less than the control group. So having control over your life says a lot about illness. Crowding animals can lead to more disease. All sorts of, as I said, experiments. And more importantly, two others that have been done. An immunosuppressant drug was mixed with saccharin and given to mice to drink. Then the immunosuppressant drug was taken away, and the mice tasted, obviously, the sweetness. They had been trained. Just tasting the saccharin got them to suppress their immune system activity. They had been programmed into that. Some work done at NIH in the opposite way. They gave an immune system enhancer to animals with the taste or smell, and then just gave them the taste or smell, and the immune system activity was enhanced. So we know that this works. We also know that if you follow men after their spouse dies, their immune system during that next year is decreased, their immune system activity, due to despair and depression. We could go on and on. I know of one case that was written up where a doctor walked into a room with a group of medical students and said, here's a classical case of TS, and then walked out with the students. The woman's heart rate became irregular. She started deteriorating. The nurse ran into the room and said, what's happening? The woman said, he just said I'm a terminal situation, a typical case of TS. What the doctor meant was, here was a case of tricuspid stenosis, but the woman was dead in a day. Patient of mine who was in our cancer groups now said she talked to her husband on the telephone, this is a few years ago, and he said, I'm fine, honey, what's happening? She said, I'll be down to the hospital in 15 minutes to visit you. 15 minutes later, she arrived at the hospital, he was dead. She talked to the nurse, said, what happened? And the nurse said, well, the doctor came in, her husband in the bed looked up and said, when will I get out of here? And the doctor said, I don't think you're going to make it this time. And he's dead in 15 minutes. I've seen people die with one breath when they've been given permission to go. We have a lot of control, but I also know that the mind is incredibly powerful. We can kill people with negative messages.
These are my parents back here, and without them, I couldn't have made it. But you need to tell your friends, your family, your doctor, what kind of support you need. You need to tell them if they're getting too much on your nerves or they're talking too much about your cancer, to tell them to give you some space. Take it easy for a while. Nicely will do. But tell them that. You have a right to do that. And they care about you, and sometimes they can get a little overbearing. Also, you tend to worry about your friends, your family, and you don't worry about yourself. You can't do that. You can't bear the grief that they're feeling. They have to handle that. You have to go on with your own life and your own fight.
I think another thing that I would want people to know, particularly parents in relationship to children. When Garrett had cancer, Garrett was 9. And we agreed very early on, and as I remember this, it was something that Garrett asked for. It wasn't something that spontaneously came out of ourselves. But he said that he wanted to be included when we met with the doctors. And we said, yeah. We agreed, you should be included every time we have a meeting to find out what's going on, changes in medications, changes in radiotherapy, changes in the biofeedback sections, or whatever. If somebody calls the parents in, you come with us, because you're the main character in this plot, not us.
Right.
And that made a big difference, not just for him, but I think for all of us. I felt different about it.
Right. Because we were all three, we were together, and it wasn't like just Garrett by himself or you and I by ourselves. We were together. We had to teach the doctors to do this, though, because they were prone to leave Garrett out. He's just a little 9-year-old. He wouldn't understand what we had to say. And once we decided we were going to do this, we just told the doctor, Garrett has to be included. And he was. And I think it helped, it was supportive to all of us, because then Garrett knew everything that we knew, and he needed to know everything, just like we needed to know everything. It saved a lot of energy of us trying to explain to him what was happening.
A study was done in California. What they did was take 400 people who had heart attacks, and they took their names, fed them into a computer. The computer spit out 200 names. Those were given to a group to be prayed for. The doctors do not know, the patients do not know. The group prayed for had statistically fewer complications after the heart attack. A double-blind statistical study. And what do you think happens to that wonderful little article when I put it up on the bulletin board next to the doctor's lounge at Yale New Haven Hospital? Within 24 hours, somebody wrote "bull" across it. That's the problem with statistics, you see. I know. I talk to doctors about statistics, and we bang our heads against the wall, argue about the studies, and come out enemies. And that's really, friends, why I talk about anecdotes, because I'm not going to argue with people about anecdotes. I have seen it. I know it's true. And if it can happen for one person, it can happen for another. The mind and body are one. If your body sees something as a healing energy that somebody else sees as poison, just guess the difference that's going to happen. On the cover of my book, a rose appears. I wasn't even sure why the rose was on it. But when we talked to the man who made up the cover, he said, "Oh, there's a wonderful story in your book." I said, "Oh, really? Tell me. What did I write?" He said, "Well, there was this lady who was always getting sick with her chemotherapy. And so she came out of the doctor's office. Husband was always with her. They'd get in the car, and he would give her a bag to throw up in. And she said one day she opened the bag, and there were a dozen roses in it from her husband, and she never got sick again." That's how mind and body work. I know loads of patients who are out of control. I mean, they are told, don't die, get therapy, and, again, don't like their doctor. As soon as you put them back in control, are better again, and the side effects totally disappear. And there's one young man, it's always hard for me not to tell stories, who came into my office and said, "Don't say it." I said, "What's it?" He said, "You know what it is." I said, "Cancer?" He said, "Yep." And he threw up in the sink just in the mention of the word. I said, "What's going on?" He said, "Well, I'm in college, and my mother and the doctor decided I ought to have therapy Friday and Saturday, so I'll be sick all weekend. Then I can go back to school on Monday." But he said, "My life's a mess. I can't date. I can't participate in sports." I said, "If I were you, I'd skip a treatment or have it on Monday. It's your life. You need to take charge of it. But I can't do it for you." And he left. A week later, we had a phone call on Friday, and I was asked if I knew where he was. I said, "No." A few hours later, we got a phone call from Montreal. He spent the weekend with his girlfriend, took the family jalopy, had driven all the way to Montreal, had a wonderful weekend, came back on Monday, had his therapy, no side effects. His mother showed up at our meeting, and I thought I was going to get walloped, but she said, "No, I knew you were right." I said, "How'd you know?" She said, "He took the family jalopy. He went to Montreal and back in it." She said, "I wouldn't go around the corner in that car." On Monday, I did go around the corner, and it broke down. I knew we had spiritual guidance. We all have that guidance. Our mind knows. There is that intuitive knowledge that tells us where to go. And you have to remember that. We deal with our bodies through our emotions and through our images and really verbally. So don't wonder when you come into my operating room why I talk to you before you're anesthetized, under anesthesia, and as you wake up with positive messages. And why we play music in an operating room to help heal people. Because at a deeper unconscious level, you hear and you know, and I'm going to put a lot of positive messages in there that are going to help you heal. And you have to put those messages in through your emotions, through your images, and through your verbalizations. So make tape for yourselves and visualize the healing occurring. When you show patients, and studies have been done, pictures of Normal white cells eating up cancer cells, their immune system activity increases. Again, use that visualization. Is it work? Of course it's work. But, you know, we get back to, do you want to live or not? Are you willing to do this? The mind and body are one unit. I know this will be easily accepted in the future, and everybody will say, oh, Siegel, oh, we know all about that stuff.
When I entered that hospital, I suppose the hospital personnel found me a very difficult patient, because I demanded to know everything that was happening to me. I demanded to know what my temperature was. And you will find that in many hospitals, the personnel think that your temperature is something they keep for themselves, but it's my body and my temperature, I would say. It's my blood pressure, it's my blood count, it's not yours. And I want to know, because I wanted to be with my doctors in a shared relationship with my treatment. Now, I suppose one of the turning points in my terrible experience trying to get into remission, that is to get the disease killed, all the cells dead in the bone marrow that were diseased, and also all the good cells, came when my dear, dear brother, who's 7 years older than I, and who is a physician himself, though not a hematologist, an allergist, was sitting at my bedside talking to one of the residents about the treatment that was being administered to me. It was very experimental, and my brother could see the dreadful effects. My hair was gone, I was wasting away, and he thought I was asleep because he loves me dearly and would never have said this if he thought that I could hear him. He said, I wonder, to this distinguished resident, why are they doing this to my brother? It cannot possibly do anything but hasten his death and also destroy the quality of his life. And the resident agreed. I didn't act as if I were awake. I didn't rouse myself, but I roused a determination that I would prove them wrong, dead wrong. And I think from that moment on, there entered not only the ingredient of hope, but determination and anger, that somebody who was in charge of me and somebody who loved me thought I couldn't do it.
What I did was single-mindedly pay attention to me. It's what our culture calls selfish. But because I was so-called selfish, because I listened to me, I paid attention to me, I tended to my needs, I'm alive and I have something to offer because of it. I think we're all here for a reason. It's real important that we be here. And I don't think we can take our life lightly and just let it go down the drain without taking responsibility. The thing I had to do was close out people that were not good to be around. There's no way I could have healed my family. There's just no way. I didn't have time for that. I didn't have 1 minute to pay any attention to anybody else or any of their problems. I had to let everybody deal with their problems on their own time. I had to take care of me. And if I was in a bad environment, I had to remove myself. I actually didn't speak to family members who drained me, who terrified me, or who just had a negative impact on me. I had to set myself up in a perfect environment. It's too much to have to heal your family too. It is so vital to take back responsibility for yourself and for your life. The way I've come to understand responsibility is that it means ability to respond to me, ability to respond to yourself. In my research, every single one of my unexpected survivors agreed that that was the most important thing we did, was to take back our responsibility, to listen to ourselves, to do what needed to be done for ourselves, to create a healing environment in every way we possibly could. Something that's real important also is I don't think cancer is an illness that's just physical. It's an illness of the whole being. I knew that there were things wrong in my attitude towards life. I wasn't having a good life. I was not happy. I was not fulfilled. I felt like I was a mess. It was very clear to me the cancer somehow made sense to me. And it certainly wasn't just some monstrous thing coming from the outside. It had very much intimately to do with me and my way of being in the world. I had to create a healing environment on every level. So I addressed the physical, the mental, the emotional, the spiritual, the social, the environmental, the aesthetic. I just surrounded myself with as healing an environment as I could. And in addition to the physical benefits and the emotional benefits that came from creating such a lovely environment for myself, I also was giving myself the message without knowing I was doing it until later that I cared about me, that I really mattered. It was a big surprise to me because I'd never even thought that I cared at all about me. I started doing affirmations. I loved myself. I cried because I felt like I was lying, and I had a big standard that I wouldn't lie to myself. But after a while of saying it, I just kept pushing myself to do it. I did. It's a lot of work, but it works. I started putting in what I wanted instead of putting in negative messages. Well, you have a choice. You can either go down the drain or you can help yourself out. And it's just get your determination in hand, get some will about you, which you have. You have everything you need. You certainly weren't, this is not a sleazy deal you've been dealt. It's not just unmeaningful, just a freak accident. It's something, you have everything you need. And you can just sit there and you can whine and you can just go down the drain and just be passive and hopeless, or you can do something about it. I had overwhelming despair. I had utter defeating hopelessness. I felt crippled. I never until 6 months ago felt like I could walk to what I need or reach out for what I need. And only 2 weeks ago I finally have gotten so I can allow things to come into me. It's been a hell of a long haul for me. I didn't have any guts, I didn't have anything. I could just go with the passivity, or I could just go with doing something. And the thing I found was I liked being with me a whole lot better when I was doing things. I had no confidence it was going to work, but I needed to do something, so I did it. And you know what you can do, you know what you need to do, and you just do it. You don't let yourself complain your way out of it, you don't let all your defenses show up that block you from being able to do it, you just do it.
If you start loving, it will change your life. Healing can occur, healing will occur. To me, true healing is love. As I said earlier, if I had one point to make, it would be to teach you not to perform, but to be yourself. And the other would be to get you to become a lover. Giving love heals you. That's what I'm talking about. A few years ago, a man came into my office who'd been a member of our cancer groups, our ECAP groups. And he sat down after waiting and he said, look, I have a brother-in-law, he's a son of a bitch, he ruined the family business, he's an exception to your rule of love and forgiveness. And he went on to tell me 2 hours worth of how bad his brother-in-law is. And I said, you know, you haven't hurt your brother-in-law, but look at all the energy you put into this resentment and hatred. You can't go to any parties with your brother-in-law, so it disrupts the family. And what are you doing to yourself? You're killing yourself, you're not hurting your brother-in-law. I don't know if he ever bought that message, to try to accept and love his brother-in-law. And what am I saying when I say love? Martin Luther King Jr. gave a wonderful sermon on forgiveness, and I would paraphrase it. He said, it's a good thing that Jesus told us to love everyone, not like everyone, because there are some people you just can't like. And I am making that point to you. I'm talking about unconditional love, the pain we all have, the thing that makes us all lovable. I listen to messages, as I mentioned, when parents have looked at children and said, we didn't want you, we wanted an abortion. We had one child because one mistake is enough. I mean, that's painful to live with. But you have to stop and say, wait a minute, I'm not that child anymore. My parents had problems too. They had parents. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, Adam and Eve were the only ones we can all blame because everybody was doing their best and, you know, but we didn't have training on how to be parents and how to love. We give a lot of messages that are not therapeutic to the children, and the children give it to their children. Somewhere along the way, you have to stop that and say, no, not anymore. From here on, I love and I forgive. I had a patient in my office a couple of years ago who said she asked her doctor if anybody with her disease ever got better. And I said, you know, if you were sitting in a concentration camp and you go up to the guard and say, excuse me, does anybody ever get out of here? I said, if you're a survivor, you don't ask, you do. She said, I was in a concentration camp and I did survive it. And I said, okay, use the same techniques now. Because when you talk to people in concentration camps, you realize how a beautiful human nature is. We did have people choose to love in the midst of all of that. I know some lovers died and didn't have a choice, but I also know there were people who walked into those camps who died in a week because they felt hopeless. And there were others who picked up stones and said, here's a pretty stone, and gave it to somebody, who took baths in their soup to maintain their dignity and loved others. And read Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, and you can see the behavior that went on there. And George Ritchie, who wrote a book called Search for Tomorrow, tells a very touching story about a man called Wild Bill in a concentration camp called Wuppertal. He said he went in there studying survivors, and he came across Wild Bill, who was vigorous, physically active, looked very well, and he presumed he's only been here a short time. Wild Bill spoke 5 or 6 languages, was a camp translator, walked around preaching love and forgiveness. And Richie said, I went up to him one day and I said, you know, the people here have lost everything in their lives, and you walk around saying love and forgive? You know, how can you do that? And he said, I saw my 3 daughters and 2 sons and my wife machine gun in front of me in the ghetto. I asked the Germans to take me next. And they said, no, you speak German, we can use you in a work camp. He said, at that moment, I had to decide whether to love or hate for the rest of my life. He said, I knew what hate could do. It had just destroyed the 6 people who were most meaningful to me in my life. I was a lawyer, I knew what hate could do in a courtroom. He said, at that moment, I decided to love. And that love had preserved him. When Richie came across his papers, he learned he was in Wuppertal for 6 years under the same starvation diet and disease-ridden barracks, and he had survived it. And that's the power and the benefit of love. And you will see it in people who make it out of ghettos. Listen to Martin Luther King say, I don't hate the people who killed my family. It won't bring them back. They have learned what healing is about. They will tell you to live the sermon, not deliver it. That's the hard part. And what I'm saying includes a lot of self-forgiveness. I know I need it. I'm perfectly imperfect. I go around preaching love and forgiveness, but I'm human too. And I need the forgiveness and the hugs of the people around me at the hospital and everywhere else. I also know it's an imperfect world, and when driving down the street one day, I realized this is reality because I pulled up behind a car that had a wonderful bumper sticker that said, honk if you love Jesus, so I gently honked, and the man turned around and gave me an obscene gesture. And I have to say, this is reality. And know that you'll go out to love, and the reason is to give it, not to get it. We're not talking about I'll love you if. That's what sets you up for trouble. Go out and love. It will heal you, it will heal the people around you.
I felt closer, maybe, and I felt, well, maybe God gave this disease to me for a reason, or something like that. But you do feel closer to God, and you pray an awful lot, I know that, and it helps. Also, you have to love yourself. You have to like yourself before you can do anything about it. You have to want to live, and you have to want to love others and like others.
Cancer is a fight between the host, that's you, and the disease, that's it. And if the host wants to live, it can fight the disease. But if the host wants to submit, the disease will always win. That is my firm conviction. And if I had one thing to say to everybody with cancer, it is to seek out the very best help. Demand that the help cooperate with you. Focus on something that gives you reason to live, whether it's love or whether it's work. And you know, Freud used to say that all of life's satisfactions come from one of 2 things, work and love. And it is both that cured me, together with the remarkable treatment I had. I was determined to work, not only in the law, but also in my avocations. I was in love. I wanted to live. And these things, I think, in combination, are the reasons that I'm here today to tell you the story. And it is a story which I think has meaning for you. And it's up to you, and you can win.
Love is a powerful thing. Psychology is a powerful thing. Take advantage of all the support, of all the friends, of your physician, of everybody. Accept all the help you can get and beat this lousy disease.
I had to make believe that I loved myself. My whole first year, at least, and a lot of the years since then, has been making believe, because in some ways I just didn't like myself very well. There was an awful lot about me, and it wasn't even very conscious. It was just this kind of a gnawing sense that if all of me got to show up, that people would probably just disappear, that everybody would just go away from me. So I had that gnawing sense in there. So I worked on the surface on I care about me, I love me. I did endless things 24 hours a day, which proved that I must care about me, but I still had a lot of lingering doubts. That's something where the extensive psychotherapy I've done has healed that. I now hold me in my heart. I love me. It took a lot of work, but boy, it's really worth it. It's our defenses that we don't love, and we confuse that with ourselves. And all I worked on for the last several years was to get rid of those defenses, to find out that I could be just as strong without. I have a story about a lobster, which my teacher Larry LeShan tells. A lobster grows and its shell doesn't grow. And so I don't know how many points in the lobster's life, it gets to the point where it can't live in that shell anymore. So it has a choice of either staying in the shell and suffocating or leaving the shell and emerging totally vulnerable and defenseless. Imagine what a lobster looks like without its shell, into its environment until it grows a new one. That is the challenge of cancer. It's to get rid of that shell, to dare to drop all our defenses, and emerge, see if we can still survive in the world. I had one of my survivors mentioned, her words were that she stripped herself of her act and emerged totally naked into the world. That's what we did, and it works. I've never felt so strong as when I've become so vulnerable. I just feel like a teeny shoot coming out of the ground sometimes, but I've never felt so strong. I don't have to constantly be warding off things, keeping things away from myself, always being on the defensive. I can let go of it. I can open. And I feel that's very much the cancer story also. It's a disease of contraction, and the healing comes from the opening, just letting go, allowing life to come in instead of having to protect yourself against it.
There's a whole business called the 100th monkey theory, that if enough of us love, it'll transform the world. And I think that's true. We shouldn't have to pass laws to get you to love yourself. You were born lovable. It's somebody else who messed you up. You didn't. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross has a wonderful little saying that was similar to my saying to people, you're perfectly imperfect. She said, you know, you're not okay and I'm not okay, but that's okay. And you begin to realize that you can forgive yourself. The process is the product. If you work on loving, you will benefit and your body will benefit. It gets a live message, and I don't think there's any more powerful live message than that. And one of the sayings I came across that I thought was so meaningful to us and to me was by Teilhard de Chardin, who said, someday, after we have mastered the winds, the waves, the tides, and gravity, we shall harness for God the energies of love. And then for the second time in the history of the world, man will have discovered fire. Someday love will be scientific. Someday hugs will be scientific. What scares me is that the medical profession is going to learn that hugs are scientific and develop a hug nurse and a hug therapist. And so the doctor will walk up to the desk, take out the chart and write, hug 4 times a day. And down will walk the hug therapist, probably a nice, robust, motherly type, who'll pick you up and give you a hug. How nice it would be if the doctor walked down the hall and said, I need to hug you. I did that for years, and I never knew I was saying I need it. I may sound tough on doctors. I can because I am one. Because I know our pain. But I know what saved me. The greatest resource is our patient. Because I said I need to hug you to patients. They hugged me. It's not easy to say you have cancer to somebody. Try being an oncologist for a week, and I think you'll be a lot softer on your oncologist and more likely to hug him and say you've got a tough job. But I also know, because I work with lots of students, that I can demonstrate how easy it is to give love and how healing it is. And the other day I took a student with me in the intensive care unit. There was a young woman, a nurse, who was on a respirator. Her lungs are full of cancer. She knows if the machine's turned off, she'll die, and she's finishing her business. And I walked into the room and just really, I love her. She knows that. And I walked into the room, and to show the student something, though, instead of going and giving her something, I said to her, you know, I'm having an awful day today. And respirator and all, she sat up, reached out, and hugged me. And I'll never forget that. She's capable of love. It didn't tire her. What it did was help her and give her something. And those are the moments I think that I'll never forget, because I know that we're all capable of love, quadriplegic, on respirators. The body's a gift through which we can give that love. And if you give it, you become immortal, you heal those around you, and you give yourself a wonderful gift, the gift of love. And nobody, I don't care what degrees they have after their name, can deny one simple fact. Love heals.